Hello everybody, welcome back to Flannel Board Fairy Tales. This week we'll be reading The Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time, there was a shoemaker who, by no fault of his own, had become so poor that at last he had nothing left but leather to make one more pair of shoes. So, in the evening, he cut out the shoes that he wished to begin making in the morning, and as he had a good conscience, he laid down quietly in his bed and he fell asleep. The next morning, just as he was going to sit down to work, he saw a finished pair of shoes on the table. He was astounded. He took the shoes in his hands to observe them closer, and they were so neatly made that there was not a stitch out of place. They were a masterpiece. Soon after, a buyer came in, and he loved the shoes so much that he paid double the price the shoemaker was asking. With that money, the shoemaker was able to purchase leather for 2 more pairs of shoes. He cut them out that night, and the next morning was about to set to work when he saw that again the shoes were sitting finished on the table. 2 more buyers came and purchased the shoes, and now the shoemaker had enough money to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. Sure enough, when he came down the next morning, there were 4 pairs of beautiful shoes sitting complete on the table. And so it went on. Each night he would cut the leather for a pair of shoes, and each morning he found them sitting finished upon the table. Soon he became a very wealthy man, and he and his wife began to live comfortably. One evening, just as the shoemaker was about to go to bed, his wife said, "What if we stayed up tonight to see who it is that lends us a helping hand?" He agreed, and they hid themselves in the corner of the room, and they waited. When the clock struck midnight, 2 elves appeared and sat at the shoemaker's table, and all night they stitched and sewed and hammered until just before dawn they had created the most beautiful pair of shoes the shoemaker had ever seen. Then, just as the sun began to rise, they stood and quickly ran away. The shoemaker's wife looked at her husband and said, "Those little elves have made us rich. We have to thank them somehow. They run about without clothes and must be very cold. I shall make them each a pair of trousers and a shirt, and you shall make them each a pair of little shoes." The shoemaker smiled and said he would be very glad to do so. A few nights later, when everything was ready, they set their presents upon the table and hid in the corner of the room. Just as before, when the clock struck midnight, the little elves appeared, and they were astonished to find the clothing and shoes laid out before them. With great delight, they dressed themselves quickly and sang, "Now we are boys so fine to see, why should we longer cobblers be?" Then they danced and skipped and sang until morning came, and they disappeared with the sunrise. They never did return to the shop, but for the rest of his years, the shoemaker was happy and prosperous, and he lived happily ever after. The end.